Christians, right? We believe that God gives us a choice, but predestination takes that choice away. The idea that, no, you don't really have a choice. You're just born saved or unsaved. So what questions do we have here? And if we were in a class discussion, which would be ideal, this is what we talk about. What choices do we have? None would be the answer to that, right? Well, then how do we know who is saved and not saved? Well, the idea that Calvin came up with is the idea of the elect, right? That you are chosen by God, and we know you're chosen by God because you are a good person and you do good things, and God lives within you, and therefore you are one of the elect. If you're a bad person and you're selfish and you do your own selfish things, then obviously you are not the elect, right? Now here's what this does to Christianity. It gets rid of the idea of missions. Why go witness to people if they're not going to heaven anyway, right? And it brings about a fortress mentality to Christianity, where what we want to do is we want to collect the chosen, collect the elect, and bring them together and all sit around being holy until we die and go to heaven. That is the key, right? So that was Luther's idea. And this is what makes him a social reformer. Get out of the sinful world, get out of your feudalism and sinfulness, and come together under a godly government and a godly faith and live together as holy, right? Holy people under God. Okay, so what we have here, in 1536, Calvin is kicked out of Catholic France. He's invited to go to Switzerland. He goes to Switzerland and he becomes the leader of a city of Geneva, right? And in Geneva, he creates his model of what he believes a Calvinist predestination city would be, right? Now, you can imagine that if the whole way that you tell if someone is saved is their actions, that it's going to be a pretty pure city. In some respect, not a lot of fun going on, right? And so you have a consistory, which is a group of rulers over the city that determine, are you being good, are you not being good? Citizens were punished for crimes such as dancing, singing, what? It's not a religious music, right? Obscene songs, drunkenness, out swearing, no, playing cards, gambling. What are you, crazy? Right. And so all of this stuff was sinful. And you can imagine how fun it was to live in Geneva. You'd wear black all the time, and you'd be very austere, and you wouldn't smile too much because that means you were being too happy. And get this. This is the consistory. Pretty scary looking guys, right? And Calvin had the power, and the consistory had the power to punish, had the power to execute, had the power to exile, right? So what we've done is we've taken the overbearingness of the Catholic Church and we've turned it and made it a Protestant thing now in Calvin's Geneva, right? Okay, but Calvinism was also very influential. It can be seen in many Protestant faiths today. A Scottish religious leader named John Knox comes to Geneva and learns from Calvin and goes back to Scotland and founds the Presbyterian Church. Now, if you're a Presbyterian, I don't want to shake your tree or anything. The Presbyterians actually have watered this predestination thing down quite a bit. But, some have, some haven't. But it's the idea of predestination that drives the Presbyterian Church. Calvinists settled in Catholic France. They go back to France because it's Calvin's home, and they become Huguenots, right? In Catholic France, again, they're not welcomed at first, but then things get better for them. Other areas influenced by Calvinism were the Netherlands. Many of them moved to the Netherlands. Many of them moved to Finland and Sweden and Scandinavia. Many moved to North America and become the American Christians that we'll see in the United States. All right, now, so that's the Calvinist Reformation. And the Calvinist Reformation is based off the idea of predestination, and it moves and changes. It's a social reform movement, right? Not just religious. Then we get to the English Reformation, which is all about who you want to marry and who you want to have your babies, right? But it's more than that. It starts off that way, but it comes more than that, right? So King Henry VIII, the PowerPoint's going to say 7. That's a typo. There should be one more capital I in there. So King Henry VIII seeks to divorce his wife, Catherine Aragon, in order to marry his lover, Anne Boleyn. Now, this is extremely simplified. And this is a survey course, so we're going through this. It hurts my heart, but we're going to go through this really fast. But Catherine of Aragon was a relative of the King of Spain. Henry had been married to her for a long time. She was once married to his older brother. His older brother had died, and so she got passed down to him. They had a great marriage in the beginning, but they've had a number of children now, and only one has survived, right? So Henry, of course, Henry was much younger than Catherine. Henry, of course, has gotten restless, right? And so he's had a number of mistresses, but he hooks onto one, Anne Boleyn. And Anne Boleyn wants to be his wife, not just his mistress. And he's fallen for her, so he wants to make this happen. So he finds a verse in the Bible that says, if you marry your brother's wife, your marriage is cursed and you will be childless. And so he brings this up to the Pope and says, oh, you wouldn't believe what I found in Leviticus. I think it's Leviticus. It's this verse that says, if you marry your brother's wife, you're going to be cursed and your marriage is childless. And this is why all my babies have died. His babies have died because he had syphilis. But, of course, medical technology and things at the time, nobody knew that. But anyway, so the Pope would be fine granting an annulment, not just a divorce, but an annulment, saying you were never really married, right? Because Henry's claim was that his brother never consummated the marriage because his brother was pretty sickly and probably wasn't healthy enough to consummate the marriage. Catherine had always swore that he had. Henry swore that he hadn't. Catherine would know, right? And so, but really what the problem was is that Catherine was related to the King of Spain, the most powerful monarch in Europe. And the King of Spain felt that an annulment or a divorce would be insulting to the royal family. So for the sake of the King of Spain, the Pope refuses to grant the divorce to Henry, making Henry very angry, right? So the Pope refused to grant the divorce. There's Henry. You've probably seen this portrait. It's very famous, right? He actually was, as a young man, was very athletic. By the time he was old, I think he had like a 57-inch waist, and he was like fat and stuff. This is an older picture. Okay, so there's Catherine on the left and Anne on the right. Anne has the V. That was a present from the king, actually, that monogram. Okay, so Henry named the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, who annulled his marriage to Catherine. And so Henry breaks from the church and makes himself pope. Everything about the church in England is Catholic except the leadership, and the leadership is the king. So the king is both religious and secular ruler in England. He appoints Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, as the head of the church, right, under him. The Archbishop grants him the annulment, and he marries Anne. That's all he wanted, right? That's all he wanted. Now, in 1534, he passed the Act of Supremacy, which said that the head of the Church of England is the King of England. Right? Now, there's some nationalist feelings going on here, too. Many people who support this move support the move that we're going to have our own church now, and we're not going to look to Rome to help govern us religiously, which had been an issue in English history for a while, right? So they like the fact that the king is head of the church and not the pope. But most of the policies of the church stayed the same. But Henry was short on cash, and one of the largest landowners in England was the Catholic Church, monastery lands. So he goes around England and he confiscates all the monastery lands, all their businesses of ironworking and sheep herding, and he just takes it all and takes all their money. Like smashes their windows and stuff. And so you go to England today, you walk around or you drive around to different places, you'll see ruins of abbeys. And those abbeys were abbeys that were torn down during the reign of Henry in order to confiscate their lands and money. Okay, so when Henry dies in 1547, he has one son, and that son is Edward. We're not going to go into all the wives. That's a great story. I highly recommend you read about it. We don't have time. He had a lot of wives. He had 6 wives, right? And the only one of them had a son, and his son was Edward. But the problem is that Edward is a sickly child, right? So Edward becomes king and rules for about 6 years, and then Edward dies. Edward is actually in the pocket of the Protestant leadership. So they're raising him to be a Protestant monarch. They want England to remain Protestant. Well, when he dies, there's only one other child, or 2 other children that could take the throne. And the oldest one is his daughter, Mary, who is the daughter of Catherine. Guess what religion she is? She's very, very Catholic, okay? And she also has a chip on her shoulder because of what happened to her mother. So when Mary becomes queen, her goal, her mission in life is to change everything back to Catholic in England, right? And so she marries the King of Spain. So if they have a child, now you have a king that combines England and Spain. This horrified the Protestants. And then she goes around and she arrests the Protestant leadership and she has them killed. She burns them at the stake. She tortures them, right? And she tries her best to root all the Protestants out of England. So many leave and run into exile. Others are captured, unfortunately, and they're burned at the stake. And this is why she is called by history as Bloody Mary. Okay, now, the Catholic Church answers at this point. right? With all these Protestant movements going on, the Catholic Church has to do something. And they call it the Reformation. The Protestants call it the Counter-Reformation, right? Because the Catholics at the time didn't even recognize these are reformations. They saw them as heresies, yes? And so there were free movements in the church that are to bring people back to the church and to redefine what the church believes, okay? So, the first thing that happened that helped reform the church was a new group of priests. And those new group of priests were called Jesuits, right? Or the Society of Jesus. They were founded by an ex-Spanish soldier named Ignatius Loyola. Loyola was very devout, very good soldier, but he was wounded in battle. And he was wounded to the point where he can never be a soldier again. So he's lying in the hospital bed, wondering what he's going to do with the rest of his life. And he comes and he has a vision from God, according to his story. And his vision said, Ignatius, you're going to still be a warrior, but you're going to be a warrior for me. So he creates the Society of Jesus, or Jesuits. And we've talked about these Jesuits before, right? We talked about them coming to America. Remember we said they are essentially the special forces of the Catholic Church. They go where no one wants to go, and they do what no one wants to do. And this is the beginning of their group, right? So they have three missions, and still today, the Jesuits have three missions. They spread the word of God throughout the world. They go everywhere. They stamp out heresy wherever it is found. That one is kind of watered down now. But at the time, stamping out meant if you need to kill somebody, you kill somebody. If you need to, torture people, you torture people. You need to get rid of the heresy. And the third thing, which is the difference, educate the masses about Catholicism. And so many of your parochial or Catholic schools today are run by Jesuits. You've heard of Loyola University. There are a few of them named after Ignatius Loyola, a Jesuit university. I don't think in town, the local St. Mary's, I don't think it's run by Jesuits. If you go to a large city like New York or Chicago, the parochial schools there are mostly Jesuit schools, and they're in charge of the education of Catholicism, right? And so they still have those jobs today. I think I got a picture of Ignatius Loyola for work. There we go. No. They spread Catholicism to Asia, India, Malacca, China, and Japan. We talked about that. Matteo Ricci goes to China. They spread Catholicism to the Americas, right? We talked about that. They tried to assassinate Elizabeth I. They sent an assassin during Elizabeth I's reign to assassinate her. He is captured and tortured and killed by Elizabeth's government, right? And they run the parochial schools around the world. There's Ignatius Loyola. There he is, right? So a portrait of him. Okay, so another thing that the Catholics did was try to reform the church in that restating what they believe. Okay, the new pope comes to power, Pope Paul II, who says, okay, we're done with all the Renaissance-ness and all the, having money and illegitimate children. We're done. We're going to get back to business. We're going to be a serious church again, right? And so he calls together all the cardinals in 1537 to a council that is called the Council of Trent, okay? And at the Council of Trent, they're going to restate what the Catholic Church believes. Now let's think about this. Reform, right? Martin Luther had some valid arguments against the church. The idea of indulgences. What? The idea of relics saving you. That's crazy. Nobody buys it anymore. So we expect the church here to back up and say, okay, fine, no more indulgences. Okay, no more relics. We're going to reform. We're going to do these things the right way. Well, you would be exactly wrong. At the Council of Trent, it's almost as if they took a checklist of everything Luther had a problem with the Catholic Church, and then they reaffirmed it, right? And said, no, we believe all this stuff, right? First of all, it's not just faith that gets you to heaven, it's faith and works, right? You cannot read the Bible for yourself. You must have the church interpret the Bible for you. You don't know what you're doing, right? There is a purgatory. It does exist, and you can go there, right? You're probably going to go there because everyone is sinful, right? And indulgences. Come on, that's the one they're going to say, okay, fine, no more indulgences. No, they said that indulgences are valid expressions of faith, but here's what they do. They slowly phase them out, so you can't buy them anymore. So they don't admit that they're wrong, but they do slowly phase them out so that they eventually disappear, right? And so here's what we have. We have two sides, a Protestant side that's over here with its ideology, a Catholic side that's way over here with its ideology, and what it's going to set up, no compromise, no bending, they're going to clash, right? So there we have the wars of religion. There's Pope Paul III, the Reformed Pope, right? So there he is. I think that was painted by Raphael or Titian. It might have been Titian. Okay, here you go. France. Calvinists in France. France. Okay, so France has wars of religion. Every country is going to have wars of religion. Some involve numerous countries. Some are isolated, like the Bloody Mary thing in England or something. France has its own troubles. The Huguenots, the French Calvinists, moved back to France. And they're a very small part of the population. You can imagine the Catholics are this huge group, and the Huguenots are very small. So what's the threat? Why would you worry about Huguenots? Well, it turns out that much of the nobility were French Calvinists. And so even though they were a small group, they were a very influential group. And that made the Catholic Church very nervous. So one example of this type of violence is on a particular day, St. Bartholomew's Day. The Catholic Church all over France, the priests get up in the pulpit and start talking about the evils of Calvinism and how Calvinism is a disease that's going to infect society. And at the end of the sermon, priests throughout France encourage people to go out in the streets and start killing Protestants, and they do. And this is called the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, where people spill out of their cathedrals and almost immediately begin killing Calvinists. They find them, they burn their houses, they drag them out, they chop them up, and this happens for months. This goes on for a period of months in France, right? And so we have lots of violence against Calvinists. Now, the war in France and around Europe is going to last the 30 Years' War, right? Eventually, in France, they'll find peace through Henry of Navarre. Okay, so Henry of Navarre, we said that the Huguenots were very high-ranking members of the nobility. Well, it turns out that when the last Valois king dies, the last king of France, Henry is the next in line. But the issue is that Henry is a Calvinist. Now, remember the importance of being a king. God chooses you to be a king. So it's not like, well, we'll pass him up because he's Calvinist. He has to be king. So they go to him to say, okay, you have to work with us, Henry. We want you to be king because you're the next in line. God obviously has chosen you. But we can't have a Calvinist on the throne. So what does Henry do? Does he stick to his guns, his theological guns, and say, no, I love God, and I'm going to stay? No, he says, okay, I'll be Catholic, right? I think his exact words were, Paris is worth a mass, right? So he converts to Catholicism, and he becomes king of France. Now you think, well, that's pretty cheap. Why would he? Obviously he wasn't very religious. But think of this. Once king, Henry passes a law called the Edict of Nantes. And the Edict of Nantes says, Catholicism is the official religion of France, which made the Catholics happy. But then he adds a clause that says, Calvinism is a protected religion in France. No one can kill them anymore. And so in a way, you can make the argument that Henry was still Protestant at heart because he made a law protecting the Protestants in France instead of encouraging people to kill them. So that's the religious wars in France. Here's some Huguenots. You could say they look like pilgrims, and they do. Yeah, this is the style of the time. So French Huguenots, right? There's a painting of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. It's a massacre. It's a massacre. Lots of people dying. It's bad. Henry IV, there he is. I think he eventually would be assassinated by a Catholic. But anyway, Henry IV, married to the Medici. That's pretty good. Okay, so there we have the wars of religion. All the way through England and France, and we'll pick up, with Elizabeth and other things, the French Revolution, things like that. But that's where we'll stop for now when we talk about the wars of religion. And then I'll put on another lecture sometime this weekend, which is going to be about absolutism and absolute monarchy. Okay? I'll see you then.